interesting how your choice of songs kind of dovetails with what I'm going to be speaking about. And this past week I had a extra bit that helped me do these messages. When I set an intention and title for a talk, kind of Spirit says, "Okay, Bob, here's some material." And this past week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Margie and I were down in Santa Cruz at the Ministers and Key Leaders, or Credential Leaders Conference. So we got to connect with some of our old buddies we went to ministerial school with, ministers we know from the region. And it was held at the Maria del Mar. There's beautiful retreat house, a Catholic retreat house, right on the Pacific Ocean. So what a beautiful place to be there, and kind of pull away and just be there for from midday Monday to midday Wednesday, and connecting with all these wonderful people. So it was kind of an interesting concept for me, about because the theme of my talk is, it's called Awakening to the Divine Within, and taking a look at some of the old embedded theology, things that we may be rattling around in our brain, which may be hampering our spiritual growth. So here I am in this beautiful old Catholic retreat center. It's 60 years old, and I was raised in the Roman Catholic faith. I went to Catholic grammar school and Catholic high school, and now I'm in Unity. So I got some of these reminders of my old past and some of the reminders of my present and recent past. So I'm taking a hard look at this, and I think a lot of us, we spend time looking for role models and mentors and teachers and gurus to kind of guide us on our spiritual path. And, but in the absence of these, we can safely realize that we have this power within us that will help guide us along on where we're going to go. A lot of us time we think of being on a spiritual path is like going on a journey with a pot of gold at the end. And when we get there, we're going to be happy. But usually if we go on a path somewhere and we get there and we get what we want, and we find out, well, maybe there's something else that we can go to. So if we find ourselves kind of lacking a little guidance in that, we can always remember that we have this power within that can help us along. If we're not sure intellectually, emotionally, whatever, where to go, we can get still. We can let go. And we can ask and wait patiently, knowing that Spirit will be in and through our lives and speaking to us through diverse ways and means. Perhaps that email or that person that shows up unexpectedly. One of the other things that we stopped at a Target on the way home. We got to make a pit stop. So we went to this Target and we walked in, and right in the very entrance, they have, of course, the holiday stuff. They had the Halloween, which is at the end of the month, but on the same display, they had some Thanksgiving stuff, they had some Christmas stuff, and I'm sure if I went around to the back, they'd probably even have New Year's stuff, so time is flying by. We're moving into our holiday season with Halloween, the end of the month, and then next month, Thanksgiving, and then Christmas, and then New Year's, and oh my goodness, all this stuff. And often holidays bring about a time of remembering and reflecting, and particularly in the holidays, if we've had people that have passed on in our life, remembering, wow, I remember they used to be with us, or remembering past holidays, past Halloweens. I remember growing up in Chicago, we used to have this parade that came down my street with a police car leading it. We go to the town hall and I would trick or treat and stuff like that. Now we're here and we don't have kids knocking on our door here in our neighborhood. So anyway, watch this Halloween. We probably will. So, because I've spoken the word. And, these holidays are they have a basis in mystical traditions and stuff, and they're meaningful in our life. And they talk about change, as we go through our life, where seasons are changing. We're now in the fall season. Marcia, I mentioned the crisp weather out there. It's not real crisp here in Sacramento, but maybe out there in Napa it is. So we're going through change. And today I want to talk about awakening to that divinity that is within us and being grateful for the aspects of our life that were brought about by this change. And I think, for me, at least, it came from showing up in unity. Eric Butterworth, in his book, Discover the Power Within, has been a springboard for some of my talks and messages, and also for my study about unity. And he speaks about the awakening of the divinity. And Eric had written this in his book, Discover the Power Within. When life demands of you, who do you think you are? Speak words of truth. Affirm for yourself. I am a spiritual being. I am whole and free. I am confident and capable. I am the master of my life. Wow. I'm a spiritual being. I'm whole and free. I am confident and capable. I'm a master of my life. And it's interesting, my brother-in-law, who is anything but religious, if we're working on something in his shop there and we're having trouble with it, he'd always say, we're smart guys. We can figure this out. So he was calling upon that spirit within him and me to help figure out getting something back together, whatever it was doing. And chapter 5 of Eric's book, Discover the Power Within, was entitled From Miserable Sinners to Masters. From Miserable Sinners to Masters. And I think the word that caught my attention was miserable sinners. Many of us have come from a faith tradition that drove us from the belief that we were miserable sinners, caught in right from the get-go, and that belief can nag us through the rest of our life. And maybe it's time to take a closer look at what was called original sin. I remember hearing that in my Catholic upbringing. And there was an interesting story about when we start thinking about that. Some years ago, I was in this fundamentalist church in Modesto, California, Big Valley Grace Community Church, and 3,000 people. Wow. And I was playing racquetball with 2 other guys from this church, and we're in this racquetball facility on McHenry Avenue in Modesto, and we're playing cutthroat. It's 2 against 1. And both of these guys had gone to that church. I think that's how I got invited. Both of them are at this church as well. And we're going on along. The game is going hot and heavy. And this one guy gets up to serve, and he turns around to the 2 of us and says, so what do you guys think about the concept of original sin? I go, where did that come from? And it kind of undid my thinking for the minutes. He's smacking the ball around. It's going, I'm thinking about original sin and forgetting all about this little blue ball that I'm supposed to knock back to him. But it's the idea of, wow, our thoughts are creative. And it pulled me away from staying focused in my game. So where did this concept of original sin come from? Well, when I started ministerial school back in 2006, I was blessed to have Reverend Dr. Matthew Fox teach a class on Western spirituality. I showed up there. We had moved from Modesto to Missouri, and March of 2006 came out there. And Margie had graduated. She was working for the Association of Unity Churches. And I was hanging around Unity Village, and they decided to offer this summer class with Dr. Fox. So here I am showing up for my ministerial education at Unity, and it's taught by a former Catholic priest, Reverend Dr. Matthew Fox. And Matthew Fox had also founded the Creative Spirituality Center in Oakland, California. And I think it was a 2-week class, and part of it we had to write a paper. And Dr. Fox had written a book on Hildegard of Bingen. Hildegard of Bingen. She was a Catholic saint, I think, in the 13th century, and he had written a book on her. And also, Pauline Press, a Catholic press, had written a book on Hildegard of Bingen. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting for me to do a comparison of this? So I write this paper. And I get the paper back from Dr. Fox. It is an A++. He says, I'm taking this back to Oakland and showing this paper around. Man, I was all puffed up. I thought, man, I got this ministerial school thing wired. Yeah. Well, guess what happens when I get my first paper back and it's a B+. Oh, geez. But anyway, Dr. Fox, along with this Western spirituality, had written a book called The Original Blessing. And in it, he looked at this concept of original sin, and he's looking at it more like original blessing. And he said that it started off from St. Augustine's mistranslation of a verse from Romans. It was Romans 5:12, which is this: therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death came through sin, and so death spread to all because all have sinned. Well, that was kind of the start of the fall redemption theology that was prevalent in the 16th century. when the Council of Trent kind of inculcated into Christianity. But, they didn't exactly define what original sin meant. Sin, and Charles Fillmore has used it in some of his talks. In unity, we think of sin as not a moral blot on our soul. It's something that has to be cleansed away with confession and contrition. But it comes from a Greek word called harmatia. In the Old Testament, the Greek does, he sinned, he harmatiaed. It's an archery term. So if I take an arrow and I shoot and go, oh, Bob harmatiaed, he missed. Am I doomed forever? No. I take another arrow, I've missed the mark, I adjust my aim and hit the mark this time. So sin is the concept of missing the mark of our original goodness, our Spirit of God that's within us. And Charles Fillmore, in his 1939 book, Jesus Christ Heals, spoke of the power of thoughts that we hold. He said, right images become active through the power of thought. Well, we know that. Man has unlimited power through thought, and he can give this power to things or withhold it. If he thinks about the power of sin, he builds up and gives force to that belief until it engulfs him in a whirlpool of thought substance. And he forgets his spiritual origin and sees only the human. He thinks of himself as a sinner born in sin and conceived in iniquity, rather than as in the image and likeness of God. Wow. So Charles is driving home that third unity principle. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. The concept we hold in our thoughts become active in our life, and we tend to forget that we were created in the image and likeness of God. This idea of missing the mark, Charles Fillmore talked about it in a book also called Talks on Truth. And actually, it's talks that Charles Fillmore gave from, I believe, 1896 or 1892 to 1934. And they put him in this book called Talks on Truth. And he talks about the consciousness of holding the idea of missing the mark and the cause of the problems. He had written this. He said, the whole secret of the demonstration of Christ, and by Christ, he's talking about that spirit of divinity within us. He says, the whole secret of the demonstration of Christ is that we shall come to realize our original sinlessness. Sin and the consciousness of sin are the causes of all darkness and death. So Charles was talking about original sinlessness, pretty much like Matthew Fox was talking about original blessing. So what about if we look at stuff in our life and we think that it's flawed and we're forever damned with it? Well, at our conference, Reverend J.O. Sloan, who's our regional rep, loves to tell these Irish jokes. And I can't remember a joke that he actually said, but it reminded me of a story of an Irish king. It happened in the Middle Ages, and it was on a small kingdom on the west coast of Ireland. And this king had a beautiful diamond that was in his possession, and he had it right in the center of his court. And it was the talk of the countryside around. It was large and unpolished and uncut, and it was his pride and joy. It was his claim to fame, as it was. And he came into the courtroom one day, or his court one day, and looked at the diamond, and all the people in the court heard him cry out in anguish. And he looked at his beautiful diamond, and there was a huge crack in it. And he goes, "Oh my God, now what?" His priceless, precious gem has now got this crack. It's got a defect. And he called all his gem people together and all his wise men to take a look at it. And people in the surrounding counties, they sent their wise men and gem to take a look at it. And he's going, wow, I don't know what to do. If they start cutting on it, the whole thing could shatter and just have diamond dust. So the king was very forlorn. And one day, a monk from one of the monasteries on the islands off the west coast there come walking in there. And this monk was anything but spiffy looking. He was kind of shabby and tattered. His hair was kind of a mess. He looked like he swam ashore from the mountains, from the island there. And he walked into the court and he looked at the diamond. He walked around it, looked suddenly and silently looking at it. Finally, he turned to the king. He says, "I can fix your diamond." Well, the king was furious. He says, "Who are you? You come into my court unannounced and you say that you can fix this? I've had the best people in the land look at this and you can't. How can you do this?" And the story says that he looked at the king and the king felt really put down. They said no one ever looked at the king in that way. So the king reluctantly said, "Okay." So sometimes in our life, where we're looking for answers to prayer, something shows up and it's anything but we expect it, like this monk, this disheveled monk. And the monk says to him, "I'll fix your diamond, but you need to leave me undisturbed for 3 days. Nobody bothers me." So the king reluctantly said, "Okay." Kicked everybody out of the court, locked the doors, and it was the longest 3 days of the king's life. I think when we're waiting for answers to prayer, sometimes that is a long, long time, waiting in the hallway for the door to open. Well, finally, after 3 days, the king opens the door and he goes in, and there, from his large, uncut, unpolished diamond, the monk had chiseled a beautiful diamond rose. And mysteriously and somehow, he had crafted it that the crack that was in the diamond was in the stem of the rose. So you really couldn't tell that it was there. It's interesting as we look at our lives and we're praying for stuff, things that we may think as a defect actually become the centerpiece and supporting role, like the stem of that rose that comes out. I didn't tell that to my Irish brogues, but whatever, like Joe Sloan. And, perhaps we have a feeling that we cannot return to our original sinlessness. That there's nagging parts of us that really kind of jump up and block us. And I came across a story of a golden retriever, and we used to have a golden retriever called Duchess. And this story was a golden retriever named Buck. And him and Buck and his family were traveling to Montana. And they stopped at a town in Montana to let the dog out and kind of sightsee. And a train whistle comes over the viaduct, blows its horn, and scares poor Buck to death. And he took off like a shot, and they couldn't find him. And they spent a couple days looking for Buck and could not find Buck. So they finally had to go back to Bonner Springs, Washington, which is a good deal away from Montana. And nothing happened. They put flyers out and all this other stuff and no response. And finally, the next spring, they get a call from a fellow in Chester, Montana, a town about 180 miles north of Helena, where this dog was lost. And he had seen a dog in his fields, and the dog had survived freezing temperatures in the Montana winter, as well as traveling all these miles north. So he was able to call this family because somebody mentioned, "Hey, there was a family from Washington that lost a dog." They came and carried their dog back. So this homing device, I think it's within us. If it's within animals, it's got to be within us, coming back to home, coming back to our spiritual home. When I was moving to Missouri, my dog trainer, who lived down the street from me, told me about making sure I kept my eye on Duchess when we moved to Missouri, because he had heard all these stories about dogs coming home long distances after their families have moved out of the area. So perhaps we have that same homing distance within us. Maybe we're not spooked by a train whistle or have to spend a time in Montana in the cold winters, but we can connect with the divinity within us. And one of the interesting things that happened to me is at this Catholic retreat center, I'm sitting out in their beautiful garden, looking at the beautiful Pacific Ocean, and over in the corner is a statue of St. Francis of Assisi. And I kind of like St. Francis. He's the saint that has all the little animals hanging around his feet and birds on his arm and whatever. And I love animals. Margie calls me an animal magnet. I can go, there's a stray cat that comes out around our thing. And I sat on the front steps, and who comes up with this cat rubbing on my legs? He says, "Yeah, animal magnet Bob." So St. Francis of Assisi was calling to me, and after looking at his statues, and I remember a story about St. Francis and the Wolf of Nubia, Gubbio. And Gubbio is a small town in central Italy. And Francis was spending his time there for a couple of days, and he heard a story about this wolf that was out in the forest area that was devouring their livestock and also devouring the people. That people would go out to kill this wolf, and they never came back. So Francis was feeling compassion for the people and also compassion for this wolf out there. So he decided he was going to go out and talk to Brother Wolf. Well, some of the townspeople said, all right, we'll come in with you and show you. And the pastor, the minister of that particular town says, all right, I'll go with you. So they start on out, and they weren't a few 100 meters out of the town. And the townspeople said, I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm going to go back in. So it was just left to St. Francis and this clergyman from the town. And as they're marching on along to come to this forest area, and this huge wolf comes running out of the forest, baring its teeth, snarling at him. And the story says St. Francis made the sign of the cross, and the wolf stopped dead in his tracks. And he says to the wolf, Brother Wolf, I mean you no harm. I'm here to broker peace between you and the townspeople. And the wolf kind of lowered his head and saying, well, okay. And Francis says, look, you've been doing harm to the people, been doing to their livestock, and actually eating some of the people. And if we make a pact between you and the people that they'll help take care of you, do you think you could live with that? And the story says that the wolf kind of lowered his head and he actually extended his paw out to St. Francis. Well, St. Francis drew him into the town, and when he showed up in the town square with this wolf, I'm sure he drew quite a crowd, and St. Francis explained what had happened. And he says, let's make a pact between the wolf and the townspeople. And they said, Mr. Wolf, can you live with that? If the townspeople feed you and take care of you, that you would no longer eat their livestock or eat the people? And they say the wolf bowed his head and again put out his paw to St. Francis. And he asked the townspeople to give assent that they would take care and feed this wolf. So they all shouted out with a big voice, yes, they would. They were happy to not being eaten. And the story is that wolf lived for 2 years with the townspeople feeding it. Didn't eat any people, didn't eat any livestock. Even the dogs in that town did not bother him. And the story ends with the wolf living a long life and dying of old age in there. So sometimes when we start on our spiritual path, these wolf-like thoughts, and if we look in our revealing word about wolf, it's these devouring thoughts that can kind of come into our mind and take us away from where we're really headed. And people kind of represents thoughts. So these devouring thoughts can devour our people thoughts. But when that St. Francis, that calming inner part of our consciousness, steps forward, maybe makes the sign of the cross. That's a symbolism that may work for you. And I know as a former Catholic, it was kind of a neat thing. But, he was acknowledging the presence of spirit. So acknowledging the presence of spirit and these devouring thoughts can kind of change the whole aspect of it. That's in unity. We look at those devouring thoughts as, guess what? The shadow part of us, and the shadow is there, whether we like it or not. Sometimes when things happen in my life, I get these thoughts that come up. I call them Chicago boy thoughts, and go, where did that come from? Well, guess what? That's part of Bob too, as well as being the minister and purveyor of truth, as it were. A former classmate's blog put out a little blurb every week, Jen Sachs, and she had made a quote from Book of Acts, chapter 10. And there's a story about this Roman army captain, Cornelius. And it says, Cornelius, a Roman army captain, told Peter, I was praying in my house when suddenly a vision in dazzling clothes stood in front of me and said, your prayers have been heard, and God recognized your gifts to the poor. Now send for Peter so he may give you a message from God. So apparently this is a Roman centurion, and he was giving his money to the people that he was an occupation for. Imagine Roman or Russian soldiers giving money to the poor in Ukraine. Well, this is kind of the symbolism there. So he's given his money to the poor, and Spirit heard him. So he says, send for Peter. And Peter shows up and says, God has shown me in a dream that I should no longer think of anyone as impure or unclean. I now see very clearly that God shows no favoritism. In every nation, God accepts and loves everyone. Oh, so that kind of really drove me home that God loves everyone, even the thieves and the robbers that are sometimes in our neighborhood taking stuff. And Spirit loves everyone. Well, today let's take a look at what we did. We looked at our reawakening of our divinity and challenged the belief of original sin, if it were. We can awaken to our divinity if we choose to see our flaws as being a necessary part of the root and supporting our picture of the picture of that rose growing out of us. And perhaps we can tap into the guiding, homing part of our thing, like Buck the dog has found his way back home. Or perhaps we can address that chatter side of us, like St. Francis addressed the wolf and Gubbio and made it and from the words from Acts that God is for everyone. So let's move into a period of meditative and reflection and prayer. And I'd like to start off our session with a prayer of St. Francis. This is one of my favorites. And St. Francis had constructed this saying, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. So moving into our meditative thing, perhaps those words of St. Francis can mull about in our mind. And we bring our awareness to our breath as we gently breathe in and follow that breath down to our heart center, that yoga chakra represented by the color green in our green spiritual candle that we had lit this morning, and hold our attention at our heart center, that wonderful organ that represents love in our culture and also sends blood to every part of our being. And if there's any part of our body temple that needs that healing hand of Spirit, we see love-filled, Spirit-filled blood flowing to that area, bathing it in a blue-white light bubble of healing energy and restorative power, bringing it at the right and perfect time and in the right and perfect way. And if there's any person, place, thing, or event in our life that needs that healing hand of Spirit, we see it wrapped in a blue-white light bubble of healing energy and restorative power, bringing about the right and perfect solution at the right and perfect time and in the right and perfect way. And Jesus of Nazareth, when asked by his disciples, saying, Lord, teach us how to pray, he told them to go within to the closet of their being, to shut the door to the outside world, and your Father, which hears in secret, speaks in a small, still voice, but rewards openly. So we have gone to the closet of our being, our heart center. We mentally shut the door to the outside world, and we listen for perhaps a small, still voice speaking to us, or thoughts flitting across our mind, or images flashing across the screen of our mind as we gently rest in a period of silence for a few minutes. And now, bringing our awareness back to our physical bodies, becoming aware of the presence of our feet on the floor, our bodies against our chair or couch or wherever we're sitting. And perhaps in our time of silence, a small, still voice spoke to us, or thoughts flitted across our mind, or images across the screen of our mind about what Spirit is calling for us to do, or perhaps not. But we've made ourselves open and available to Spirit, and Spirit and universe abhors a vacuum. So sometime later today, a call from a friend, a book we're reading, a movie we're watching, an email we receive on a computer is something that'll trigger what Spirit is having for us to do today. And maintaining this prayerful consciousness, we'll bring to mind some prayer requests that were brought to the surface today, particularly our sister Nancy and how her gout has flared up. And we see that being resolved quickly and easily as that Christ Spirit within her body restores her to perfect health and wholeness. And Steve has continued recovery from his situation with his heart and his wonderful walks that he takes with his friend and keeps building and building strength and power. And Lon, healing from his fall and recovery of his hand so he can once again play with both hands on the wonderful music he provides for our service. And for Don and Judy for their lives as they move forward together, and for for Judy's friend Jennifer, who also broke her wrist, see her happy in health, wholeness, and healing coming to that broken wrist and restoring it to perfect freedom. And Sally for Bill's back and his dental situation. We see the Spirit of the Lord moving in and through Bill and his back in particular, and also his teeth, two functions of our body that we need to move about through this world. And if there are any other prayers or concerns for healing, I invite you to see that clearly in your mind's eye right now. See that thought. And if you're keeping yourself muted, speak that thought for healing for that particular person and giving their name. That way, Spirit knows exactly who you're praying for. And even if you can't recall the name, or if it's a general person, just Spirit knows what to do from there. So now let's open our eyes and we can sing our alleluias, meaning rejoice,